Good evening and welcome to the Cincinnati Public School Audit Committee meeting on Wednesday, February 26th. We'll go ahead and jump right in. We've got some committee updates that we have to do, including potential new member appointments, as well as review of our charter, going over the meeting schedule and reminder about our conflict of interest. So we'll go ahead and jump into those items here. First, this year we have up to three member positions open, community member positions open. And thanks to efforts of those in this room and outside of this room, we actually had four people apply for that position, which is actually rare. So we typically don't have more apply for a committee position than we do have seats. So we're in a little bit of a different position than we normally are, where we have historically looked to see qualifications, and if we feel like someone was a member that could contribute to the group, we admitted them, generally speaking. And so we are in a different position this year with four applications for the three positions. So Clarice and I both met with all four of them. Actually, we didn't meet with all four of them. Well, one of us met with all four of them. Both of us met with two of them. Their resumes are in our packets and hopefully everyone took a look at them. Each of the candidates had unique qualifications. They're very different people with different backgrounds. And we found them to be, I won't speak specifically for Clarice, I found them to be engaged, have a relevant background. They were all reside in the city of Cincinnati. Rick Jeanette, Addie Carson has a very unique background that's not something that is currently represented on our committee. She's a project manager with clinical data, so a little bit different background than what we would consider to be represented typically here with mostly financial professionals. I found that very intriguing. John Young is a future CPS parent, so I've always found future parents or parents in our district to be, interesting contributors to our group. He also has a financial background. Laura Oliveira is a IT auditor, Protivity, so I found her background to be very interesting and very applicable. And Carrie Roush is an internal auditor at First Student, who is a vendor of ours. So we do want to talk about that for a minute. But her background is very relevant. Having been at First Student, she's very plugged into the transportation world, which is relevant. However, there could be a potential conflict or a perceived conflict with her representation on the audit committee. She was fine, by the way, if she were to be appointed to the committee, she was fine with recusing herself if and when transportation or First Student ever were to be brought up in front of this group. Clarice, would you like to add anything about any of them?
I disagree. I think we had a diverse group of applicants coming with experiences that would be beneficial to this committee. My only concern, or the biggest question I had, was the with Carrie and the possible conflict. But again, that's a decision on how that's supposed to run. But it was a pleasure meeting them and talking with them and getting to hear their passion about the audit committee and Cincinnati Public Schools. So it was a great opportunity.
So I guess I would like to pose a question to the members of the board that are here and get their perspective on a employee of a vendor, of such a significant vendor. Now, one of the interesting things about her as an employee is that First Student or First Group is a $8 billion multinational corporation. So she doesn't exactly, have financial interest necessarily, direct financial interest, or nor does she have any voting power or any power within an organization that would be so significant that it would impact our relationship, at least the way I perceived it. But I certainly, ultimately, if and when we do decide to vote on new members as this group, it goes through budget and then it goes to the board, and the board ultimately has to make the decision to approve or to not approve. So it would be pretty silly for us to put forth someone's name that the board might have a problem with. So is there any thoughts, Mr. Craig or Mr. Crossett?
Um, I think, how many positions are we trying to fill?
We have 3 open positions
Three.
with 4 applicants.
4 applicants. I feel the same way that you do, that, it's First Student's a big company and she wouldn't really have much influence over the contract that we have with them and all that. I do worry about the optic, and I worry about having to explain it. I think those would be, just to have to pause and explain it, I think would be could be a challenge. And so it'd be nice to get people appointed and have it, be smooth. So that's just, Brandon.
Yeah, I would share somewhat of a similar thought, is in that I don't know that there's necessarily a conflict again in her given role within First Student. I don't know there's a potential. I don't know there's ever a matter in which she would be deciding something that would also be something we would be deciding. Or the also uniqueness of the audit committee is that you are not a decision-making committee, and that you are not like deciding not whether or not we have a contract with First Student or not, or for that matter, even deciding how much of a contract we have with First Student or not. So I don't know if there's any added benefit that you would get from their end either for being on this side. I think nor do I think she does any work based on if I remember her resume. I don't think she does any work on like advising on anything related to our contract at all. So I don't think there's necessarily a conflict there in that sense. I do think to Mr. Cross's point, though, and I think this is stuff we've talked about before, is there a perception issue that could be present? Yes, but again, I think that's a decision that the committee has to decide as to how much of a lift are they willing to, how much of the lift is the committee willing to do to ensure, if this is the person we wanted to go with. Um, it's also, again, the other 3 candidates there's no one that seemed to be like a clear, we don't want that person. So, which would have made some of this easier, right? If it was one clear no. But I do think one of the things that may need to be just kind of discussed as we go forward, regardless of whether or not we select this person or not, is if a person on the audit committee were to ultimately change jobs into a position, and I think we talked about this again with like folks who might move or other things. If someone were to take a job in which they would be working for a potential person who's either a vendor or looks to be a vendor to the district, how do we want to handle those as well? Because I do think we want to have kind of a clear line that if we're saying this is not acceptable because of her working for a vendor, that everyone in the future be held to that same standard. But again, because the committee is very unique in the sense of whereas like a board member would have a very different relationship because we would be a decision maker. I don't see it as being a direct conflict, although again, I think it's whether or not the committee would want to do the lift of explaining.
Anyone else have any questions or thoughts on that topic? Or on our meetings with any of the candidates?
It's great. We have 4 candidates.
Great and bad. Difficult. The process isn't overly prescriptive. It's not, you must qualify for these various things. I mean, it's not, I've always said that if you can be a contributing member of the organization, then we would welcome having you. And so we're in this unique position where we have 4 and only need 3.
I was gonna ask, was there any and again, not to put you both on the spot there, but was there any thoughts or leanings towards any one or two of those four that you met with that you thought might put them above put them above the other applicants?
I felt like John was the most interested in what we did and how we did it and how he could contribute to the district. I mentioned I think he had a young child who will be a future CPS student. So I thought that stood out to me. Carrie's experience as an internal auditor, I thought was intriguing. We have auditors on the committee, and Kevin's a former internal auditor, and so we do have that experience, but not, not overly represented. So that was intriguing. Rick Jeanette was a former PTA president, which I thought was intriguing. She has firsthand knowledge of, school dealings at the school level, which I don't know that anyone here has. So I think those stood out to me for those three, above Laura's purely IT audit focus. I don't know what you think, Clarice.
Well, I didn't meet Laura, but I'm with you with John. John was very impressive, very passionate about the work of the audit committee and his contribution to it. Was eager because of the child being almost part of CPS. Rick Jeanette, I was also intrigued. Initially, I was like, well, wait a minute, she's the president of the PTA. How will she be on the audit committee? But then learned that her two children are now at Walnut. So they're no longer at the school where she was the PTA president. So she's no longer in that role. But to Dan's point, I think that brings a very different perspective to this group that we have in hand, and may provide some insight and objectiveness that, especially in this time, that may be needed.
It's probably before anybody's time. Maybe Lauren, you might remember, I can't remember his name. We had a member of the audit committee that was a pure IT guy for a while. And he gave us a lot of really interesting, good recommendations. For what it's worth, that was actually pretty valuable. Do you remember?
I think that was just before I started, but I do remember the list of names of the original founding members, and that would make sense. And in terms of where we're headed with expanding our IT work, there could be nice alignment there as well. I kind of look at Emma as she thinks about the future of our IT program. I'm sure having other IT auditors to lean on is helpful.
You did, you did, but it's a valid point.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, are there any other questions or comments with the group? Okay, well, we're gonna have to vote. I think the best way to do this, Lauren, would be you can vote for up to 3, and the majority based on a roll call vote would be the 3 that we would nominate, and you could vote for none. So, does that make sense? I'm looking kind of to board member Craig and Crossett to make sure we're on the right track here.
Yeah, I think so. Or you could, I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
You were gonna say, or we could.
I mean, like if someone wanted to nominate a slate of 3, that could be done as well, and then we would just vote on that slate. But I think it's either way.
Does anyone feel strongly about nominating a slate of 3? It's not named Dan.
No.
Okay. I would nominate John, Laura, and Rick Jeanette, and sort of encourage maybe Carrie to reapply at another time when there's another opening. I do think all four of their experience would be valuable, but like if it just feels like sort of an easy one person to not include this time just because there is that conflict, but not to say this is a rule you can't ever be on the audit committee, but at this time, maybe, it's not a good fit. So I would nominate those three.
I was leaning in the same direction, so I agree.
So is that Liz? Is that a motion from you?
Sure, yes,
Okay.
I motion.
And Carol, is that a second?
And I second.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Is there any further deliberation on this topic? Okay, so now we'll do a roll call vote. Lauren, could you do that, please?
Yes. Dan,
Yes.
Clarice,
Yes.
Liz,
Yes.
Seth,
Yes.
Kevin, Paul,
Yes.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Mr. Crossett,
Yes.
and Ms. Bolton. There we go. Unanimous passage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, the next item to discuss is the audit committee charter. And in your packets, there are two versions. Did everyone get both versions, Lauren?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a version that we discussed at our last meeting, and then another redlined version with edits based on discussion and other feedback we received. I would like to go over that and kind of point out the changes, the reason behind the changes. After I go through everything, we can have a deliberation over any further edits or thoughts put into this. And then at that point, I would entertain a motion in a second to try to get this thing passed so that we can push it up to budget and then to the board. I would also like to point out that on the first page, this was last revised in December 2021 on behalf of Miss Bolton, because I know she'd say it if she were here, that it was like every year we were revising this thing. So the fact that we went 3 or 4 years without having to revise it was great. And I think the board appreciates that. And we would probably strive to make sure that we also go another couple of years before we have to revise this again. So that's why there's so many changes in this version. So the first page at the bottom is adding the word community to clarify that the 10 members that are on the committee, in addition to the 3 members of the board budget and finance committee, are the 10 community members. So that makes sense to me to add that there. Just for clarification. There was a clause in here that said all members must reside in the city limits. We had some feedback, and this is probably one of the areas that there might be further deliberation if I have to guess. On the paragraph at the very bottom, we added in candidates who reside and or work within the Cincinnati Public School District boundaries may be preferred. Calling out that while we may not make it a prescriptive, you must live in the city, we feel like there are people that don't live in the city that could still contribute to the organization and to the committee. However, there may be a preference to that based on where you do reside, possibly even where you work. If you are an employer that employs students that will come out of our district, you do have a vested interest in the district. So that's a consideration for an update to the charter. On the next page, there was a clerical update to delete a duplicated word. Second paragraph down was some clarification of what we might do as a committee if we do need to determine that we need to add community members during the year. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. Previously, it was if we fall below 8, we had to do something. If we now, under this wording, we would have the ability to do so. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to ramp this process up in the middle of September when the normal process might take place in December. So adding a little bit of flexibility here for us. Slightly further down the page under audit committee chairs was just a clerical typo that we are correcting. Further down in meetings, there's a clarification of what constitutes quorum, calling out all of the committee members versus maybe some ambiguity of whether it's the community members or all of us. Further down, we're going to leave. We're recommending that we're leaving in is expected that you attend the meetings, which I think is a standing expectation. We only have 5 a year. However, there was language put in there, I think, in our last iteration where there would be a strict process of reviewing membership if you miss 2 meetings in a row, which I think is very prescriptive and could be harsh depending on people's personal circumstances and their needs. So we certainly would consider that if someone missed a bunch of meetings, we would still consider their membership, but not make it so prescriptive. The following paragraph, we would delete the sentence that says further, the audit committee shall appoint one of its members. There's already language above that was added around the chair and vice chair positions. So this was redundant language. So we would recommend removing that. There's some clarification about meeting agenda and meeting minutes and how those are provided to us. And so this is just really a clarification of what we're already doing. So nothing really too daunting there to change. Next on the 3rd page are 3 passages that we are recommending to delete. These are things that we've historically not done. However, they've been in the charter. We've never been asked, nor have we ever reviewed the complete annual financial statement. That would be task of substantial task. We don't even bring it to this meeting anymore because it's hundreds of pages. Also, we would remove the paragraph around reviewing other sections of the annual report and regulatory filings. It's just not really in the purview of this group to have to do those things. Further down under external audit, it implied that we would every year meet with the external auditor prior to commencement of the audit, which we have not done, nor do we plan to do as an advisory community board or committee, excuse me. And right above that, we are recommending to add a sentence around supporting the internal audit's recommendations and also encouraging management's timely remediation of those findings, which is an area that we have been involved in and decided that it would be a good idea to call that out. Lastly, on the 4th page would be to remove paragraph around reviewing and confirming the independence of the external auditor. As I discussed this with Lauren, it's the independence of the external auditor is on the external auditor to determine that they're independent, as well as the state, and not an obligation of the audit committee. And lastly, the paragraph below that, instead of saying on a regular basis, meet separately with external auditors, it's on an as needed basis. So we would not want to preclude ourselves from meeting with the external auditor if they had something that they needed to report to us. But we would not obligate that to be a mandated regular occurrence if it's not needed. So sorry, I tried to get through that as quickly as possible. Hopefully everyone had a moment to read these before we got here today. With that, I would like to open it up to any discussion around what we're proposing here, and we can discuss and go from there. Yep, Jim.
One thought on the review and confirm the independence of external auditors. I think it might be, I don't know whose job it would be, whether it's the committee or maybe it would be the internal audit department, but I think we ought to get some documentation from the state or something saying that they're independent. Just so that it's not our duty to do it, but maybe we have a duty to confirm it or something. I mean, because if we someday we have an auditor who's not independent, they're going to say, well, what was the audit committee doing? I mean, it might still come back to us as a question. So just a suggestion. And the likelihood of it ever happening is so rare, but still, I mean, that's the only thought I had. All the other changes I thought were great.
Lauren, when we talked about that, was that something that you had read that was a statutory requirement of the state? Because the state appoints Plattenberg as the auditor.
Okay,
Yeah, so I wonder.
okay, maybe it's superfluous then. Okay, I just didn't know if we needed to
That's a good question.
check
So
the box or anything.
Isaac just mentioned it may be certified in our single audit and then our ACFR state. I didn't bring the whole ACFR with me, but I think they certify their independence in those documents.
Okay.
So I think that should give us good coverage. The only thing I could think, and as you're reading these, Dan, is if we engaged in additional supplemental consulting services, those are the time with the same auditors, ensuring that we maintain independence and avoid conflicts there. So maybe that's something we can just, conclude in conversations as we vet external auditors.
So, never mind.
Well, it's also typically those representations are in a representation letter, which would be signed by presumably the treasurer, a board representative, probably.
Yeah. I think it also could roll up into the bullets above it, the review, the performance of external auditors. I think in theory, we would be reviewing whatever information they provided to us. And so there would be a level of confirming that they are an external auditor in that process of reviewing them. So, I mean, I think it could definitely fall within that bullet points to still be done.
Any other thoughts?
I have a sort of a grammatical clarification on the bottom of the second page. So I'm in the yellow one, not with the purple one. And there's some language crossed out. It's like half of prepared.
Yeah, my arrow didn't move. So I was doing these all
Okay.
with lines in PDF really quickly before the meeting. So that line should strike via the written audit committee report and replacing to the members. It shouldn't be striking the line where it's currently
Oh,
placed.
okay.
I
okay.
apologize.
That's okay.
Yes, I
just didn't
shifted
wanna
things and
end
my
up with,
my
like,
line was in the
half
wrong
of a
spot.
sentence. and
Yes,
shit.
I know. Of course, I see
Okay.
that as soon as I always notice after I print. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for catching that, Liz.
So a question, on the subject around candidates who reside in the district, is there a reason why we said may be preferred instead of are preferred? It's still preferred. Why did we say maybe? Just a question.
I don't have any preference.
Oh. I'm wondering if there is a difference in the two languages.
I think we were, as Dan and I were just talking before the meeting, trying to leave it clear that it's an option or a consideration rather than a requirement. So I think we chose the word may just to drive that home. So that way, in the case that, let's say we are comparing two candidates and chose one that doesn't fulfill that over one that does, we don't want that to be a cut and dry where someone would go back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further considerations? Okay. And I ask for a motion to approve the audit committee charter as written.
I'm motion.
Thank you, Clarice. Can I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Lauren, can you do a roll call vote?
Dan,
Yes.
Clarice,
Yes.
Liz,
Yes.
Seth,
Yes.
Kevin, Paul,
Yes.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Mr. Crossett,
Yes.
Ms. Bolton. Thank you.
Missed Carol.
Carol, this was my-
Second.
This was my handwritten version. So Carol, I apologize.
Well, you, on the last
let's
vote,
let's do the first one for the members.
I was gonna say, because I didn't vote on
Yes.
that one either.
Okay, let's do your vote on that real quick.
Yes.
Yes, and your vote on this one.
Yes.
Sorry, my handwritten scribble real quick.
Well.
Thought because I seconded, I didn't need to.
All right.
Thank you.
Then that will go up to finance for approval and hopefully board approval at the next meeting. The next item I had was just a list of our meetings for the remainder of the year. I don't really think that we need to go over these in detail. They're there. So just everyone, please take note of those. Was there any changes? to the
Yeah, we
board?
just one change. We scheduled the October meeting initially at the same time as a board meeting, so we moved from the 16th to the 8th now.
Okay.
So just want to call that change.
And lastly, I think in everyone's packet, if you hadn't already signed your conflict of interest forms, please do review those and sign them. Do you have everybody's? Okay, all right, perfect. All right. So we've run over a little bit of time. My apologies. And my apologies. I do have to leave a little early today, so I'll be passing the baton to Clarice tonight to finish off the meeting. My child pickup duty that I didn't plan effectively around. So, but we'll move along to external audit reports.
So we have a guest with us here tonight, and of course, in the mix, I left her name tag upstairs, but Bernice Riga is here with us this evening from our ITM department, and we're so grateful for her coming to share her work around the E-rate program, as well as our most recent E-rate audit. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
As Lauren said, I manage the E-rate program for the district, and I'll give you a bit of information about this program. What is E-rate to begin with? It's an FCC program designed to assist schools and libraries in obtaining telecom services. The program provides discounts or reimbursements for those services from 20 to 90%. And those discounts are based upon whether it's a rural versus urban school district, and also on our National School Lunch Program data. Reimbursements to CPS would be funneled directly back into the CPS bank account and back into general fund. And then those funds can be used for anything. There are no strings attached. Point. How CPS benefits from this program is that per funding year, we receive approximately $3 to $4 million in reimbursements. And that's generally on 3 different services: our network services, our managed Wi-Fi services, and our internet access services. We have received approximately $94 million in reimbursements from this program. Then on to the next part, our challenges in this program. It's pretty challenging day to day, and that the FCC frequently makes changes to the program, to program rules, to processes, to systems. So we do have that challenge, but overall, our biggest challenge is probably our audits. We are pretty heavily audited. For example, in 2023, we received 5 small audits and 1 very large audit. That large audit was from Regis and Associates. Typically USAC, which is the Universal Service Administrative Company, which manages this E-rate program for the FCC, they hire outside firms to do their larger audits. And ours was done by Regis and Associates in Washington, D.C. That audit lasted from April 2023 through July of 2024. And thankfully, during that time, we did not receive any small audits, and we haven't received any since then either. But all the 5 small audits and that large audit were all no findings at all. And that's what I have for you. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to get through them.
How many hours do you feel like you and others in the district spend on these audits?
I spent a huge number of hours on these audits, a lot of hours. I couldn't give you an estimate of an actual number, but it is significant. The smaller audits are ongoing. What the SLD and USAC has done in the last probably 5-6 years is the number of large audits has been reduced. And what happens then is we have a large number of smaller audits, and that it does take up a lot of time. There are others outside of myself that have to contribute to these auditors. I will contact Jen Wagner if there's something that I need to prove that we paid a particular invoice. I'll contact someone in another department if I need to prove that the district is like in compliance with CIFA, the Children's Internet Protection Act, and things like that.
Does anyone have any other comments, Jim?
Questions?
$3 to $4 million is a lot of money.
It is.
Thank you very much for doing those audits and having no findings. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're
That's
very welcome.
$4 million means a lot to the district. So thank you. Much appreciated what you've been doing.
I enjoy the job. Oh, thank you.
Are these federal dollars?
That's a very good question. These, I'll need to give you a bit of background to explain it. When the program started, the program was set up, allowing the FCC to levy fees on interstate telecom carriers, AT&T. And those fees go to a big pot of money to the FCC. The FCC then divides that money up into several different programs, 4 to 5. E-rate is one of those programs. So when you go home and look at your telephone bill, or you will see there's a USF fee on there, it stands for Universal Service Fund. So as of right now, those monies are still viewed as not taxpayer dollars, but instead as fees levied on telecom carriers. I say that as of right now because last year, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled that funding mechanism, they found that funding mechanism as unconstitutional. And that the government had given third-party access to taxation to someone who didn't have that authority. Basically, the USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company, I know this is complicated, that the FCC uses to manage the program. Two other circuit courts at the same time ruled that it was constitutional, that the funding mechanism was fine. So the Supreme Court now is taking up that argument and going to give us a decision at some point, hopefully this spring. But as of right now, it is not taxpayer dollars. It never was taxpayer dollars. Until recently, it has always been outside of the focus of political parties, one or the other. It's been because of that, the way it was set up and funded. So those dollars are only for these programs. They aren't, and they can't be shifted to another program.
Do you know if, depending on, how that lawsuit shakes out, could that end the program
It could.
entirely, or would it just
It-
cause it to have to be reorganized?
It could end the program. And that may be a political question also at this point in time. I would hazard a guess to say that it will not end the program. It could, but I don't think it will, only because I think more than 90% of the school districts in this country and libraries are dependent on these dollars for those services. I think there would have to be something else put into place to replace that.
So you say library, so does every school have a library?
Public libraries,
A public, okay, got it.
like when you go into the public library downtown and you use their Wi-Fi. Their Wi-Fi is supported by those dollars. The program was first started to support rural school districts because they were so far away from those service providers that it was just prohibitively expensive to try to buy those services for their students. So that's the way the program began, but then it expanded to all schools. And any schools, all public schools and libraries are eligible to apply for the services regardless. Indian Hill gets reimbursement for some of their services, maybe 20%. And CPS, we receive 85 to 90% reimbursement of eligible costs related to those services. Really nice.
Well, just another example of being a highly audited district by many of external folks. But also having a clean opinion is very important because it shows that we're doing what we should be doing with the dollars that we are awarded, and trying to find ways to fund operations outside of the taxpayers of our district, which is all very important stuff. So, any final questions or comments?
So Lauren, is that a department that your team audits?
We have not historically audited E-rate just due to the coverage and the exemplary outcomes of those audits. So we have not historically.
I do, however, keep Lauren apprised of any audits that we receive, any issues whatsoever. Lauren, Jen, Jeremy, Mike, They are all kept in the loop.
Okay. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lauren. I'm gonna head out if that's okay.
Okay, next up is Jen. I think she's joining online.
I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Before Bernice leaves, I just want to say that she's an absolute rock star. I've worked with Bernice for many, probably 20 years now. Yeah. So, and she's gonna be hard to replace when she finally retires for the second time. So we need to find somebody to replace her. Anyway, so I'm talking about the single audit. We had an unmodified opinion. I won't go into it because you may or may not have read it at all. But with no management letter, no management comments, it's very clean audit. And that's it. Celebration. They did audit our ESSER dollars this year, so that was fun. Have any questions?
Doesn't sound like it. All right, well,
We do a lot of kudos to Mike and Kevin, Kevin Ashley, I think you've met him or you've at least seen him present. Is Kevin in the room?
he is not.
Okay, he's usually there. Well, he's kind of our coordinator liaison with the audit. And he actually used to work for the Ohio State Auditor. So he's very uniquely qualified to help us to get through our audits and coordinate. And he also manages a collection of the what used to be called the CAFR, the one that's like 1 billion pages long. It's now called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the ACFR. And so he helps produce that.
Yeah, I don't envy his job by any stretch of the amount of time and effort that has to go into that. Jen, how many years in a row do you think that we've had a clean audit from our external auditors?
For at least the last 10 years that I've been the treasurer, we've had a couple management comments, but no real findings that I can remember off the top of my head. Prior to that, I don't know. I don't know that I ever looked.
Great.
But we have won those awards for our CAFR or ACFR. I think for 18, 19 years in a row, something like that.
We're almost running out of wall space for the awards upstairs, so good problem to have.
They've switched plaque a year to like a 5-year plaque, and they just give you a button for each year. So that's
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you to all those involved. It is continually important to have clean audit opinions to continue to show the public that we're good stewards of their money. Brandon, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and some of this information we presented in budget and finance and as well to the board, but I think it's just, again, really important to show the lack of conversation we have to have is because there is nothing to have a conversation about. And I think that's true to the hard work that they are doing, but also to the hard work that we are developing on the lower levels of how we report information up, how we're collecting information, how we're keeping track of things. That is also part of the work that this committee and the internal audit team really is focused on as well. So I think it's important to give every level of this process a good kudos because of the hard work that Kevin and Mike do, but then also the hard work of the folks who are out there keeping track of things and making sure that we don't have to report something or nothing is of a concern on the audits that we have.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jen. And now we'll turn it over to Lauren and the internal audit team.
Thank you, everyone. So I want to first start by welcoming and introducing our newest team member. Justin Blauman is our new internal audit intern. He joined us at the end of January, and I will turn the mic over to him to introduce himself.
Well, as you know, my name is Justin Blauman. A little bit about me. I'm a fourth-year student studying accounting and finance at the University of Cincinnati. I'm also a goaltender for the school's ice hockey team. Looking in the future a little bit for myself, I do plan on sitting for my CPA exam. I do plan on graduating next year. So I have one more year for the 150 credit hours. I do plan on getting my master's as well, and then taking that time during the year to sit for the CPA and study. I've been helping out Emma and Isaac with continuous monitoring. And while I've only been here for 3 weeks, I mean, I would like to use this platform to thank everybody that they've been more than welcoming. And in the 3 or 4 weeks I've been here, I've learned so much. And I look forward to keep continuing to learn and getting to know each and every one of you individually. And then as the meetings progress throughout the summer and the rest of this year, maybe taking more of a role in helping this district progress into even more extraordinary things.
Thanks, Justin. So we've been having trouble keeping up work for Justin. So he's flying. So this is a good problem to have. And not to say we don't have enough work by any means. He's just moving. So it's great. So wonderful. So we're going to jump into a brief presentation about our internal audit reports. Our approach with our presentation is assuming that folks have had the chance to review and read the reports. And for the public and those, I'm sure the thousands watching, giving them the summary and the highlights of the work that we did. So to start, it's interesting, both of these projects, the first being our Business Plus audit and the second being our records retention audit, albeit they sound like very different projects, they actually were very similar as we got into them. So what we mean by that is these are two areas that we have not previously audited, which these days is kind of hard to come by. We have really gotten through a lot of our core processes. So with that being said, we've been considering the feedback that we've gotten from the audit committee around auditability and the amount of time we spend on our procedures and getting the most value out of that time. So what we've devised are these set of audit procedures and kind of a decision-making tree, if you will. And, feel free to look through in more detail, but the key takeaway is at what point do we stop? At what point do we have enough information to give a well-founded recommendation? So we start our process with inquiring. What is the procedure? Do we have documentation? If yes, then we progress. We move on to observation, reviewing that documentation, understanding the controls. And from there, if there are well-defined processes with well-defined controls, we move on to the testing aspect. So what you'll find through both of these reports is we predominantly focused on the test of design. So do we have those procedures? Do we have things well designed? A future phase of these audits could be more a test of effectiveness. How well do those controls function? So I just want to start by sharing that because I think that's the flavor you can carry through both of these projects. So I'll turn it over first to Emma Mueller to go through the Business Plus audit, and then Isaac Karn will lead the records retention discussion.
Yeah, so our Business Plus audit, like Lauren kind of mentioned, this was our first time looking at it. It was also management's first time working with us on anything with Business Plus as a system and not just us asking for data. So what is Business Plus? It's an ERP system that's designed to support financial, human resources, and administration operations throughout school districts. We use it a lot for managing financial transactions, payroll, budgeting, procurement, accounting, lots of things. So we would consider it a key system and something that internal audit should be looking at. We broke our audit objectives into two very simple and straightforward objectives. The first one being establishing a baseline understanding of one, Business Plus and its environment here at CPS, and then what is the control environment. From the first objective, we sorted it out between 3 sub-objectives. So we were looking at gaining an understanding of our logical access, change management, and authentication processes. Those were the 3 we thought would be the most easy and transitionally the best to probably go into not knowing what this environment is going to look like and working with management. Our next objective was to document any existing control processes, any system limitations that we saw, and then areas where maybe formalized documentation for procedures or processes were not implemented yet. And then lastly, we would evaluate the effectiveness of the control environment. The second objective would then be to make recommendations, which we do in every audit. So kind of stated for itself. And you might be asking yourself, what is logical access, change management, and authentication? So logical access controls are essentially security mechanisms. They regulate how users, applications, and systems interact with different data. So why does a user have this type of access versus another user having this type of access? Your change management controls are more of a structured process. They ensure that any modifications to the system or to the environment are systematically reviewed. So they should be reviewed, approved, and your segregation of duties should be involved with that as well. Authentication is more of verifying an identity. So if there are certain areas within Business Plus I shouldn't be logging into because I'm internal audit, it should stop there versus somebody who might be in payroll who can log into a further part of Business Plus. So those were the three process areas we looked at. For logical access controls, we looked at role-based access, we looked at access revocation, and then we looked at privileged user access reviews. We did inquiry and observation and testing for role-based access and for access revocation. So we tested a very small sample. We were able to talk with management, observe the process documentation that they provided, and then eventually request the support where we could go and test. For the privileged user access review, we talked with management, so we did inquiry observation, and then we also looked at who was a privileged user within the system, didn't see that there were any issues with anyone who had privileged user access, but ultimately there was not a process or a procedure documentation with that. So we did not go through with testing. Similar with change management controls, we had 4 we could possibly go and test. That was segregation of duties with workflow changes, segregation of duties that are system enforced, and then change authorization and change testing. We did inquiry with management and ultimately decided that those would just be recommendations going further. And then for our authentication controls, we decided since SSO is within Business Plus and ultimately managed through Active Directory, which is an ITM and network security audit, we're going to just tie that in with them. So I'll be working with Jeremy on that. But our recommendations, we had 5 for logical access. You can read through them, but really it's just writing their process and procedure documentation. We're not saying that these things are not happening, but for us to go and do an effective audit, we need to be able to audit against something. And then same with change management. So just defining what your roles and responsibilities are, what the workflow management would look like, and so on and so forth. We've discussed with management, they were on board with prioritizing this documentation and then working with us to potentially close any further control gaps when we do go back and test. All in all, I think it was a really good first step into figuring out what Business Plus does and is capable of and what's there for us to look at. And then I think having these discussions with management ultimately leads them to being able to get that process documentation for the other areas that eventually down the line we will be coming to look at. So I don't know if Adam and Jen had anything else to say, but more than welcome.
Thanks, Emma. So Adam is online with us. He was going to be there in person, but unfortunately he broke his ankle a few days ago. So he's trying to recover from that. But he's online. So I don't know, Adam, you want to speak on this or?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. So first of all, thanks to the internal audit team for helping us through this process. It's been very enlightening. It helped us start a lot of our process documentation. While we had some of it already ironed out, it's really it's letting us take a step back and really look at our procedures and make sure it's documented properly. So wanted to thank internal audit for helping us through that work. We have started finalizing the documentation that Emma was referring to, And we are also formalizing some of the processes for change management. We had a process, but it just wasn't documented, and we're going through the documentation process right now. So hopefully by the end of the school year, we'll have something finalized for internal audit to take a look at and make sure it's what they're looking for. Other than that, I think that's all I had. Jen, did you have anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Any questions from the audit committee? I'm sorry, our cameras are locked down, so we can't show our faces as we're talking to you. So I don't know, Rob, if you can unlock our cameras for us.
Yes, Jim.
Thank you for doing this audit. I can see where you could have significant risk. I'm just kind of curious, just in your initial look at it, in the initial findings, it seems like because we've had clean audit opinions and background checks and all kinds of things that we've been able to, this risk hasn't surfaced, I guess, as a problem, correct?
Yeah, so I think with the clean audit findings, that's with the data side of things and the financials that are being plugged into Business Plus. So what we were looking at is more of like the system enforcements and what the system is doing, which from what I have seen, I have not come across any glaring issues. So I think that's the difference there. I do think it's important for our team and then management to kind of get our heads wrapped around of what might be coming down the pipeline with the state auditor and potentially what's the red book guidance when it comes into question on your systems and any IT audits that they could potentially do.
I'm just kind of curious, does the profile of privileges of a person working in the system, is it linked to a job title or job description?
Yeah, so and Adam can answer too if he would like, I guess. So yes, we did see that based on your job description, you do have certain access within the system depending on how it's set up. And then if you're a privileged user, you would have like almost backdoor access to then do certain things within the system. And with the privileged user access, what we looked at, we didn't find any person who was not supposed to be on that list. We did suggest that if somebody had financial reporting capabilities, that they had read-only access, but that's something ultimately management can decide to do or not do. I don't think at this time it's a risk.
Thank you.
So are the privileges granted like when a person is hired and they're put in at the position level? So is it at the position level? Is it granted through HR that it is a systemic granting of access, or does someone have to go in and actually grant access for that position or that role?
So if you're a privileged user, you're going to be set up to have different capabilities than someone who just has a typical job description user access. And depending on what your job description is or your job title is in the system already has an idea of what you should have access to. That being said, there are going to be some principals who have certain capabilities than other principals. Like if they have a P card, they're going to be able to do certain things within Business Plus that have to do with a P card. That would be a little more customizable. So I think Adam and his team have already been going through that list and making sure anyone who is a customized user has the appropriate access, and then anyone who would just be a typical user also has that appropriate access. But it was set up in the system correctly from the sample that I looked at.
Okay.
So one of the things that we've learned through our audits and our continuous improvement projects is that the first thing we have to do is document, because nobody really understands any process from beginning to end, especially if it crosses departments. And so, excuse me, that's usually the first step. And so our audit, internal audit team is bringing that to light as well. We just need to do a better job at documenting and keeping those documents in a good place that's accessible.
So, and will echo a little bit of what Jen just said there, I think one of the things we've been talking about on the committee is about the ability for the audit team to be able to actually do a true audit of every part. And I think one of the stages we talked about is, do you have systems and processes in place so that we then can look at to see whether or not that process is actually functioning and working correctly, or whether or not there are factors that are involved in the process. And so I think this is a great step to get us back into, or get us more in alignment with the goal of what we were talking about with regards to the purpose of the audit team, right? And do some of these audits, because I think that was the other major finding from the last couple of years, was that we were doing a lot of audits of places in which there was no system in place. And so how effective is an audit that tells you that the non-system is not working? Uh, and so I appreciate the fact that what we are seeing is that there are some spaces where we have procedures that are happening that maybe we just need documentation so that for future years and for future folks who come through, that they continue to follow those procedures that are working. I did want to kind of also give a little bit of a thing to the hardworking team for. I think sometimes we also have some of these things where we worry that someone has access that should not have access, or worry that there's someone who's slipped through the cracks. And I think the fact that they're following a procedure, now they'll document it, but they were following a procedure enough that it wasn't someone falling through those cracks, is a great sign. So I just think that's a great work for all those folks who are involved.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you to Adam. I know it's not fun when when internal audit comes in, but the team was great. And I think it's going to be good going forward too, now that we kind of have a first step, which is always the hardest part. And I think if there aren't any more questions, we'll go to Isaac with his records retention audit.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. So records retention. Managing the retention of records is very important and even required throughout almost all governmental entities. Both federal and local entities have to comply, and it promotes accountability, transparency, and effectiveness in day-to-day operations. So internal audit received a board request for this area, and district leadership agreed that it would be beneficial to look into it and see how things are operating, because we have never audited this area either. So internal audit's goal is to incorporate both compliance and operational effectiveness and efficiency into the audit. You can go back to the last. Perfect. Thank you. So I created this visual to provide a bit of an overview and a little bit of context to the life cycle of a record, and kind of outline the baseline requirements for the management of records. So from the approval of the retention schedule to the disposal or destruction of the record after its retention period, that is the kind of entire process of how long we have to retain the record. And there's a more thorough and detailed explanation of laws and regulations in the report under the project overview section. Thank you. So upon the completion of various planning tasks, such as preliminary research and obtaining an understanding of the district's processes and procedures, we developed these 5 objectives for this audit. And all 5 objectives were addressed for both physical and digital records. So for key findings, no specific compliance issues were found regarding specific requirements with the state, which is a positive thing for us to find. A majority of these findings related to the decentralized nature of the processes and procedures around records management. So with departments having full autonomy and ownership over how they manage their records, we found a lack of consistency in how they operate. The audit also found that records are regularly retained well beyond the specific retention period that is required. And there's a significant opportunity for records disposal and preventing a buildup of outdated or obsolete records. Recommendation. So after identifying those primary findings, the 10 recommendations primarily address process improvements and opportunities to increase operational efficiency and effectiveness. So the first recommendation listed here is likely the highest priority, with developing a comprehensive and a collaborative team from all areas of the district to manage this work. This team will likely assist with implementing the remaining recommendations. An internal audit also wanted to note that it's at management's discretion to decide how to prioritize or address the recommendations and the amount of time or resources they would like to allocate to addressing them. And we primarily worked with Jen on this one as well as our legal counsel, Dan Hoyne. So if either of you wanted to provide any additional insight.
Yeah, I'd like to provide a little bit of context to the thing. So by Ohio Revised Code, every school district is supposed to have a records commission. And the treasurer is the chair of that committee. And it consists of the treasurer, the superintendent, and the board president. And we're required to meet once a year and approve any destruction of documents. So that we have a schedule that we've adopted. We have a vendor that takes our records into the salt mines, and they're responsible for picking up records and then disposing of them according to the schedule. So we're in compliance with the state law. The reason I asked for this audit was my request was because of the cybersecurity issues that we've experienced, and it became glaringly obvious that, you know, as we transition all of our records to electronic digital records that are saved on the network, that we didn't have any consistent guidelines to departments to say, this is how to encrypt a file. These files should be encrypted. These files should be encrypted and stored in this location so that those smart criminals can't get to them. So that was my biggest concern. And there's a team that's meeting, and Adam represents our department. They meet weekly, I believe now, and to come out with some standards. But Isaac is right. This is something that's been decentralized, and every department kind of does their own thing. And the risk of having all these paper, we never throw anything away, ever. Like in the Ohio Revised Code, we have to keep a student record for 100 years. It's clearly defined. I'm watching people's faces like, yeah. So, and employment records we have to keep for a long time. We have people that are filing for Social Security retirement, and they have to prove they need a copy of their birth certificate. So they come to us to get a copy of their birth certificate because it's in their student cumulative file. So I used to be in charge of those records 100 years ago. So anyway, we acknowledge that we've done a very poor job of collaboratively or cohesively managing the records and then actually going and making sure people are doing it. So we agree we're going to take it on. The problem is we spend so much time rushing from one board meeting to the next or one deadline to the next that this is just kind of something that gets set aside. And nobody really attacks it, but we do need to make it a priority and work on it. So I appreciate Isaac, all your hard work.
Just to add to what Jen said also, and certainly what she discussed in terms of the importance of protecting ourselves from cyber risks, and, making sure we're encrypting and things like that. Very important. The Ohio Revised Code related to how you retain records, and it has nothing to do with that. It is, to be very frank, anachronistic. It's talks about on an annual basis what boxes of records you're going to destroy or dispose of, making sure Ohio History Connections is aware of that before you dispose of those records. Ohio History Connections, we sent to them, I think, our records retention schedule for the year in October. We still haven't heard from them. So it's from a time when public entities in particular had to be very careful about the disposal of records because everything was kept physically, et cetera. Now almost all of our records are kept electronically. It is not a problem of keeping of which records are destroyed. It's that we have everything forever. That's sort of our current issue. And we can work through that. We appreciate the audit team, appreciate the recommendations to start a records management group. Mike and I have talked about developing a training that we can do on safe schools, particularly for our CAS and CFOP group. They represent our administrators and clerks. These would be the folks who have most. But to reassure the committee, I mean, the district receives over 300 public records requests per year. We respond to those in a timely fashion. We've received awards as a district for our timely and appropriate responses for public records. We receive subpoenas. As Jen said, we receive almost daily requests from like Social Security applicants, disability applicants who are asking for their records from 20, 25 years ago, and we regularly respond to all those records requests. So feel good that we are retaining records well, perhaps not disposing of records as on a more efficient basis. Thank you.
Awesome. Any questions from the committee?
I have a question, I guess more of a comment coming from healthcare compliance. Bless your whole heart with that record retention. Because of the highly regulated nature of maintaining the records. And I know we would run into the same issue with storage, and also having to keep records in certain media and then making sure you still had the device to be able to read that media. So you had to store all of this additional extra stuff. And you said you guys are now electronic with your paper records?
We are, though some of our older records are still microfiche, and we have just a few folks in student services who have that's something they've had to make sure they're training a new generation of folks on how to use some of these records.
So yeah, that was
Yeah.
very interesting to me. So thank you for your work on that.
You.
Any other questions? Yes.
One quick thing I might add is Isaac mentioned about the resources and then where to go next. It's kind of a how do we today improve things moving forward, put more efficient processes in place, and then you'll see this in the report. Isaac says, then how do we attack the old stuff? The 10,000 boxes that are sitting there, the 16,000, I think in total that are sitting in SC Strategic. We do pay to retain those there, and as budget becomes more and more of a concern, $100,000 or so that we spend to do that, every dollar counts. So I think it's the prioritizing, like Isaac said, the management's approach to this is really critical, and recognizing the resources to invest in this, because I think we talked with management, you could go as far as hiring a records officer, but again, we don't have the resources for that. So what kind of few steps, like they've brainstormed, could we do to make the most impact with hopefully the most minimal amount of time and resources to do so? But I just think this was both of these projects were incredibly eye-opening for our team. I think we tried to approach things a little bit differently and lessons learned from all the audits we've done in the past. And hopefully our team and management and the board and audit committee feel we've got some good takeaways from these projects. But huge kudos to our internal audit team for all the hard work on this.
Congratulations. Next, we have the audit committee dashboard.
So I can keep this very brief as I know we want to save a few minutes at the end to talk through financial discussion and other district business. So you should have hopefully a color copy, maybe not. The printer was acting up of the dashboard. It is available as a PDF and of course also as a live dashboard. So quick items to highlight, you'll see at the top there under external audits, you will see that fiscal 24 audit we just discussed is marked completed. There are 3 other audits in the grants areas that are in progress that we will keep you informed of as they wrap up. And then briefly glancing at the fiscal 25 progress of the plan, you'll see that I believe we're about 55% of the way there, but we are really just now wrapping up, making that really hard push as we head towards the April 23rd audit committee to complete and wrap up and report on all of our projects. So I think we're on track. Probably those tasks will, you'll see a big change between now and April. And then I'll skip over each of the individual projects unless someone would, as you see something, stop me. I'm happy to dive in. The biggest thing we wanted to discuss with you all today is the status of past recommendations. So we are now seeing, we're learning each year in each audit committee new things about this. So this year we added estimated implementation dates, those due dates. So what happened next is what happens when people are past due? What do we do about that? And so you'll find in your packets a proposed escalation plan that Isaac put together. I'll give the highlights, and if you have any questions, Isaac can certainly provide more detail. But what you'll see is at the very bottom, Rob, if you don't mind, the very last diagram, you'll see currently, even further below that, is the days past due. Yep, just above there. So the 2 bars of just above it. Perfect. So the days past due, currently we do have a few in the 0 to 60 days. So that means 1 audit committee update. And then we have a few more, or a few less, I should say, in the 60 to 120. So we wanted to mark this up as an example of what kind of steps we would want to take. So you'll see that, as I mentioned in the escalation plan, this has been shared with senior leadership and then again shared yesterday with our directors and managers to get their input, because ideally, and this is a tool for management to speak directly to you all in the most efficient way possible. So our idea is sharing this with you today, getting feedback. For the April meeting, would it be helpful for us to allow that graphic on the dashboard to be a drop down or an report? So if you click it, it would take you to those items. So you would say, what are those 2 things? It would say the detail of the additional recommendation, the implementation date, and then management's most current update. So you could read the detail. So I'm getting some nods. So I think that's what we'll do for the April meeting, if that works well. Bring that, let you play around. We'll see how it works. And then we're trying not to change too much midstream, but for the July audit committee meeting, that would trigger the start of the new year, give us a little time to socialize this further with everyone, and then start to put that into place come July. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts or feedback and regarding that plan? Wonderful. And we've been very cautious to inform management. Please don't mark them complete. So, it's not meant to be punitive. Quite frankly, there are plenty of good reasons that things could be delayed. However, we do want to monitor that and be transparent. So great. Well, any other questions on the dashboard? Wonderful. Oh, yes.
Some of these that are long past due, I mean, are you able to sort of rank them in terms of risk? Or are there things that give you consternation that aren't getting done in terms of possible failures? Or
that's what we've been trying to balance, because historically we've not always given our recommendations a risk rating. So we tried to go back and assign things. However, the more realistic approach that we're taking is reviewing the individual instances as they arise. So I think at this point, we've had thorough conversations with management. They're well aware that this is coming down the pipeline as well. So I think, to sort of answer your question, I think this process will help bring those to light more clearly. But in the given moment, I don't believe we have ones that are giving us significant pause. I always asterisk that, Isaac, if you want to add.
Yeah, I would just also add that I think in today's terms, when we issue recommendations, we try to be very descriptive in what success or complete looks like. And I have found with some of these older recommendations that are still outstanding, the recommendations are pretty vague in the sense that they are ongoing and like they continue to strive for um, increased efficiency or increased accuracy. And so I think that has to do with it. And then also some of the older recommendations with being vague, they are massive undertakings. And so they have just um, haven't quite got around to completely finishing up the work for it.
I know when you make a recommendation, management gets to make a response. Do recommendations get adjusted based on a management response in terms of maybe like feasibility?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we also always check it every time we check in and ask for an update. We ask if it's still applicable or is this even still relevant? One of the most recent circumstances we ran into was around the student fees thing with the board kind of making some decisions. So that actually ended up making some of our recommendations around cash controls irrelevant because it was no longer a risk. So that's one example. Yep.
Any other questions? No? Are you done? You're good? Okay. Next we have the financial discussion and other business.
So I think that comes to me. I'll try and be brief about this because there is a lot going on, but some of it is still not decided yet. So the first thing I will say is that the board did make a decision, and it's a great decision. The board at our most recent board meeting passed a resolution selecting our own Mike Guston to be our next treasurer.
Yay.
The decision was so great, it brought our current treasurer, Jen Wagner, to tears in happiness there. So I'm always happy that we make folks happy. But truly is great to have Mike as the next treasurer. It brings a lot of continuity to what the work that's being done, but also I know there's a lot of work within the team that Mike's been integral in doing. And so we were very happy to have him apply and then be able to select him. It was a great search. I know several of you all participated in the interviews. We had 5 people in the initial, and then the last we got it down to 2. I think it was 5. I can't think. We got it down to 2 for the finals there. So we really appreciate you all and the folks from the union working with us on that. The 2 major things I will update on also is that we're right now in the process of still finishing our budgets, and so we are kind of building our priorities. And so I know there's been a little bit of a reach out to some of the folks within the community and some of the folks within our staff to gauge their interests and the things that are their priorities and the things that they value, while we're also trying to figure out staffing and other stuff. This is incredibly difficult also because we're in the midst of labor negotiations as well. So all of this is happening in one big, swoop of time. So that's why we don't have a lot of definitives on that part. The other major thing that we are trying to begin the conversation around is we have a levy this year that will need to get placed onto the ballot. And so I think there's a lot of discussion as to how we want to go about it as far as a strategy, but also as far as what is that levy dollar amount that what makes it work. This levy is one that is a operational levy that also includes a carve out for preschool expansion. And so our preschool operations kind of deal expansion, for quality preschool expansion. And so I know we are in the midst of having conversations now to build up more of the um, conversation with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise to ensure that we're getting a common message out there to the public once we've kind of brought brought the levy to the forefront. But those are kind of the two big ones to my mind that we are working through right now is really, again, the budget and then working towards the levy. I think one of the other major things that I don't know that I would be remiss without saying is that we also are looking at policies that are specifically set to address some of the other concerns and things that we've seen, our cash balance reserves, and in some of the efforts to collect aged fees and aged debts, or is we as a board are looking at that options as well as to ensure that we're not spending money unnecessarily to try and collect when it would be uncollectible, or also to address kind of going forward some of the questions around what are fees that we charge, what are fees that we don't charge. Because as we looked at some of our student fees, especially some of our age student fees went back significantly to nearly when I was in school. So I felt uh, we may not need to have something 20 years old on our books still as a fee. But so those are things we've worked through and started talking about through Budget and Finance Committee. I don't know, Jen or Mike, is there anything I missed?
I just wanted to say, to give context to the student fees, that's another area that was decentralized out to the schools, so they're responsible for collecting their own fees. And so we are looking into ways of re-centralizing that work and helping that process. But there are, some people that declare bankruptcy, so we don't have any chances to collect that money. I just need a board policy to give the treasurer the authority to write off the books. So that's what we're working through. I don't know, Mike, you want to give a couple comments on the governor's budget bill?
Sure. Sure. So, just a couple things. The governor's budget was released a couple weeks ago. So this is the first step in the state budget process. Governor does his proposal. It works through the House with amendments. Then it goes to the Senate. They do their amendments. Then there's a conference committee to put the two together, and you get a final budget, right at the beginning of July. And so there's opportunities for changes along the way. The governor's budget does a couple of things for us. The biggest issue for us is it freezes the cost inputs at 2022 values. So if you think about how much things cost 2022 versus how much they cost now, you can see the problem. So multiply that times the size of a school district of ours, and you can see. So that is a big deal for us. There's also some guarantees that were built into the funding formula that kind of came around in 2020, 2021 for schools that lost enrollment. And so they're trying to roll back those guarantees as well. That's also an issue for us. So put those things together. The first simulations, we would stand to lose about $10 million next year, in state aid, and then probably an additional 5 the next year. So obviously everyone's kind of coalescing around some issues, and you'll see a lot of, if you watch the news, especially the state news, you'll see a lot of things going on. There's testimony, there's hearing, people offering amendments, but people are trying to kind of, circle the wagons, rally the troops, and put some pressure on the state legislature to do the right thing for schools.
And just as a reminder, and I think the budget presentation they did is in the files that we have from the last board meeting, but just as a reminder, our share of the formula that the state uses to determine how to fund the schools dropped significantly this past year, and is basically according to the budget plans and what we're looking at will potentially drop significantly going forward, absent a large growth of enrollment. That will have a significant effect on our what we receive from the state to educate our students, and even the portion of which the state says we need to educate is below what we utilize actually to educate students. So I think the state says it's like 8,000 or a little around 8.
Our base cost is 8,101.
So it's going to be a continuous struggle of figuring out what's that balance. In addition to that, we will have to look at again, future levies and other things that will be a part of the discussions as we go forward for facilities needs, as well as again, the major construction projects that are needed in districts, because we do have a lot of buildings that are older, and we do have a lot of population change within the city that has shifted a good portion of some of our newer areas that are of congestion of students to one side of the city, and made changes on others. And so we're constantly looking at those types of things to make sure that we're putting together budgets that will help as we go forward, but also when we need a levy, when do we need these other things. And so I know that's going to be those are our conversations for the next few weeks, months. The wonderful thing that Mike signed up to take over. So, but that's kind of where the state of things are right now. I don't know if there are any questions or.
Can I jump in for just a second? So the urban treasures, we huddle every Thursday morning, and Mike has joined us for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 months, I guess. We all met together face to face in Columbus and went through the budget bill, and we are trying to come up with amended language to introduce so that we can have a big, strong urban voice, because all the urbans are going to get hurt a lot in this bill if it goes forward. Now, I've been around long enough to know that the budget bill that gets passed is going to look very different than it does today, but we may have to do some letter writing campaigns and testimonies. And if we do, I'll work through Lauren to see if we can, I don't know if the audit committee like in April could pass a resolution or are willing to sign letters or whatever, but so we'll keep you informed.
And also we have a couple of, so we have a budget, Just Ask Jen coming up for March. And then I think are we still on track, Jen, for doing the legislators in April? Are we gonna move that?
So March is, we changed the budget. We pushed internal audit to April. And so probably in May, we might.
Okay.
I did talk to Lou Blessing and Dunny Isaacson, and they both agreed to participate. So I just got to send an update.
And we'll just, Ms. Davis, we'll just kind of send something out to the folks who had responded already to let them know we're going to be moving the date back. But again, we're trying to keep some of these different things in there. So if you are available to tune in to and join in April, I believe that one is it still falling on April 1st? The date for, I believe that actually is when it's scheduled for. Please join us at the Just Ask Jen session.
April Fool's Day, yeah, I think so.
And just a quick logistic note, on the dashboard, I tried to link the last 2 fiscal 26 budget presentations directly to when they start in the board meeting. So if you want to just kind of watch that section, those should be linked on the dashboard, as well as Mr. Craig said, the documents are handy as well, or uploaded.
Thank you for that. Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Do we have to do a motion? I'm sorry, go ahead, Seth. I don't know if that one went.
So I hope this is an appropriate question to ask, but I was curious if there was any impact to the school district's financial position based on the current political environment at the federal level.
I was thinking that, but did not.
Say that is a to be determined.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, so one is I think there is a lot of question as to what actually is being or going to be coming out of the federal government, both from a what are they going to dollar amount, and then also from a administratively how they are operating on some of these things. I think the state level, there are some legislation things that have come through that are working their way through that could have a significant effect on the district. I think that's another thing for us to just be paying attention to. But as of right now, I think we are still in a wait and see mode, as Mike said.
I think to support what Mr. Craig has said, that the state levels is kind of is what it is. It's the normal process, but I think it is important to note that the state, I think I got these numbers approximately right, but the increase in money for the money for public schools in Ohio is about $1 billion, and for vouchers is about 2 billion. I think is the numbers that I saw. So the state is pushing more and more money towards vouchers. And that's, I don't see that trend stopping, for what it's worth.
Are we going, I know the Don School District is struggling and collapsing. Are we doing something to go after those students to get them back into the Cincinnati public schools?
Yeah, let Dan answer that.
I'm
But
bringing in the attorney.
So our understanding is they'll continue as a school through the end of this school year before they dissolve. We have already received quite a few students from Doane. We expect to continue to receive, and we welcome every Doane student coming over to Cincinnati Public. The other thing is some of their property, because it's purchased with funds that otherwise would have gone to Cincinnati Public, we get a first right of refusal to purchase. To date, there's been nothing even close to attractive to us in terms of purchasing. There's a building on McMillan that we walked through. I believe that's one of the only properties they owned. Most of their properties they leased, but we walked the building with our facilities team 2 weeks ago and told them we were declining on the right of first refusal for that property. So, but we'll continue to have open ears and eyes on that.
we did take in we are in the process of taking in a number of the students with regards to the Xavier Montessori
That's right.
school that is now going to become a lab Montessori school within our district. So K through 6 school, or I guess pre-K through 6 technically.
Montessori
I think it's pre-K through 8.
Yeah, that's through 8.
Through 8? Oh, okay, yeah. More than
Any other questions? Do we have to do a motion to adjourn?
Mhm.
Yes, okay. Well, can someone give us a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Or do you have to do a roll call
No,
vote?
just
All in favor? Any opposed? All right, well, thank you all very much. Our next meeting will take place on Wednesday, April 23rd. Have a good evening.
Thank you.